Did you know that The Who's drummer Keith Moon made an album of just him singing? If you didn't know, let's talk about it. Born on August 23rd, 1946, Keith Moon would have a somewhat normal upbringing as a child, but during his adolescence he was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD for short, to which, while in school, his art teacher would say, in fact, that he was artistically retarded and idiotic in other respects, while his music teacher, however, wrote that while Moon had a great ability to play the drums and, understood music, he must stop showing off to his classmates and distracting them during these lessons. Well, because of all this, he would drop out of school at age 14 in around Easter 1961 and enrolled at a technical college, which would lead to a job as a radio repairman, thus enabling him to buy his first ever drum kit, which he would use for the first few bands he was in until April 1964 at age 17, which was where he would audition for a small group that would eventually become The Who as a replacement drummer for their previous player. But the famous story of how he joined was that when he met Pete Townsend, he was to have said to his future would-be bandmates that he could play the best drums that there ever was, to which he would then show them his way of playing, which impressed them so much that they, in fact, the next day called him up and said that he was hired for the job that he would keep until the day he would pass away. But unfortunately, however, it was during this time in the early days of The Who that Keith would start to develop his addictions to both drugs and alcohol, and plus he would become known for his very destructive behaviour, whether it was smashing up his entire drum set or destroying a random hotel room that the band would stay in while on the road. And so from then on he would become affectionately known to people as Moon the Loon. These acts, which were oftenly fueled by his drug and alcohol intake, plus along with his ADHD, were his way of demonstrating his electricity and yet personal enjoyment of shocking the public around him with his comical yet crazed or inappropriate behaviour. But by the mid-70s, Moon's legendary drug and alcohol problems had become more worse to a point where he would struggle to just drum through a highly demanding Who show, and plus would start off his days, whether it was on or off the road, with his addiction of comfort, which was alcohol. So from the moment he woke up until the moment he went to bed, he was practically just drinking and, taking the odd drugs here and there. But where these problems would really rear their head, however, would be during The Who's 1973 Quantifinia tour, where during a show at the Cow Palace, he'd famously pass out behind his drum kit after taking way too many tranquilizers, to which the other members of the band who were still on stage would have to pick an audience member who could play drums to fill in for Keith while he was backstage being revived. Well, luckily for them, a young man by the name of Scott would volunteer himself to play the rest of the set on drums, and thus helping them fulfill the remainder of their remaining show. After this incident, the other members of the band were seriously considering whether or not to keep him or replace him for the remaining future of their group, as they saw him at this time as unreliable due to missing rehearsals and rocking up to shows drunk or high on any drug of his choice. Plus, to add insult to injury, his wife Kim finally left him in the same year due to his cheating and jealousy towards her during their crazy 7-year marriage. So here now in mid-1974 with an uncertainty towards his future and most likely high on a shit ton of drugs, plus with the added bonus of having way too many famous friends to help indulge him in this ego-driven idea, Keith would decide to record a solo album of his own, just mainly singing, but Moon would however play drums for only 3 tracks out of the 10 tracks featured in the album. But to go back to The Who for a bit, during the early years of recording, their sound engineer would prefer to mute Keith's vocal microphone on the mixing desk because he felt as that Moon's singing voice was terrible. But of course, Keith being Keith would have a knack for making his bandmates laugh during these vocal sessions, which would eventually lead to him being banished from the studio when vocals were being recorded. But being the Joker he was, however, Keith would still sneak in and disrupt these vocal sessions by making funny voices and imitating animal noises as to get a rise out of the other three bandmates. But now coming back to mid-1974, however, so as to complete this solo album, he would enlist the help of many different musicians from the likes of Ringo Starr and Harry Nilsson, plus many others also helped him, like David Bowie and Mel Evans. Yes, this Mel Evans. Anyways, let's take a look at Keith Moon's Two Sides of the Moon, track list by track list. We start with the first song called Crazy Like a Fox.
Hello everybody and welcome.
Hello.
Which is this typical mid-70s rock pop song with this like tongue-in-cheek, over-the-top British accent that Moon was apparently told to go for, as one of the producers, mainly Skip Taylor, demanded that Moon abandoned the country twang he had sung on the early songs during the first half of these sessions, and instead sing in this posh British accent that he regularly would mimic during the later half of these sessions for some reason. But unfortunately, this posh British accent causes more problems than it does to help him in this sense to be taken seriously, as it gives the listener a sense of that maybe he's taking the piss out of the record buying public and is not being really serious with any of this at all. The next track is called Solid Gold.
It's number one.
It's number one
On your local radio.
on your local radio.
But unlike the previous song, I actually dig this track personally, in that it's cheesy and fun to listen to, in that it's not even singing, but more so this like spoken word style of talking the lyrics instead of singing them. Other than that, it's just so fun to listen to as a comical experience overall, personally. Here we go. The third track is called Don't Worry Baby. The first cover out of like 4 covers on this album. Which, Don't Worry Baby was a tune that was originally done by the Beach Boys back in 1964, which, honestly, their version of Don't Worry Baby is one of my all-time favorite songs. Everything about it is perfect, from the production, the vocals, to the instrumentation, to Brian Wilson's famous falsetto that, you know, sounds so beautiful, yet comes with this sense of, yeah, he lived that shit in real life.
Well, it's been building up inside of me for real. I don't know how long. I don't know why, but I keep thinking something's bound to go wrong.
Unfortunately, however, Keith's version is honestly god-awful, in that everything about it sounds so soulless. While I respect that he's not trying to sing it like Brian originally did, like, I mean, if you're wanting to do a playlist of awful covers, this could definitely be added to that playlist for sure. Like, the ending to this version is just Keith Moon saying "Don't worry baby" over and over again. I shit you not. Honestly, like he had forgotten to sing the ending bit, like he was maybe high or a bit too drunk for his own choice. Recording this? I don't know.
Don't worry, baby.
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 While researching for this video, I just found out before recording the audio for this, is that there's 2 versions of this particular cover, whereas the studio one's in a lower key. The single version, however, is Keith's rather shocking and horrendous attempt at copying Brian Wilson's famous falsetto, which is really bad. Like, please don't listen to it, I mean it.
Well, it's familiar. I've been trying before. I don't know how long. I don't know why, but I keep thinking something's bound
fourth song is this country sounding for the time song called One Night Stand, which ironically, although sounds very basic in its production, surprisingly enough, kind of suits his very limited vocal range, if much of any at all. Overall, One Night Stand is actually my favourite song on this album in that it shows Keith could actually do country music if he really wanted to. Plus, I see myself listening to this more often as a standalone song.
I don't mind other guys dancing with my girl. That's fine. I know them all pretty well.
The fifth and final song on side one of this mixed bag album is a version of his famous band's 1966 tune, The Kids Are Alright, which, what is there to say about this cover other than that it sounds okay, but unfortunately, however, you can hear certain parts of the song where Keith is struggling vocally to keep up with not only timing, but also the pacing of the song's hard rock tempo, by going off key for most of the song. But luckily for him, he has backup singers to help his otherwise lacking vocals on this track. And also there's a shit ton of reverb to help as well, of course, which was mentioned in reviews at the time of release, which I personally believe this was the choice of more whoever helped him produce this album. Not so his, unfortunately. In my personal opinion, I think the producer or producers must have realized during these months-long sessions was that while Keith could play incredibly great drums, unfortunately his off-key singing wasn't going to help him lead into a solo career of his own outside of the band. We're now on side 2, which starts with a song that John Lennon had given him called Move Over Mrs. L. Which, while Keith's version is interesting, because it sounds like his Uncle Ernie character from the Tommy movie, this song must have been recorded during the filming of the Tommy movie. As you can tell, his voice falls into this like Uncle Ernie style of singing, while also sounding off-key at the same time, to which unfortunately reverb couldn't save him here. While John Lennon's version of the song isn't my favourite song he did in his solo career, honestly, I much prefer his version over Moon's Attempt. Although I don't hate this version at all, as more so it interests me in that he was looking for a list of songs to record for this album and this one came to his mind for some reason. And you couldn't tell me that the session musicians involved were not dying of laughter from not only just that of his voice cracking, but by the mid part of the song, he starts shouting the song's lyrics like a madman. The next song on side 2 is another cover, but this time of Ricky Nelson's 1962 tune, Teen Idol.
Some people call me a teenage idol.
Again, it's a fine basic track with this nice 60s sounding guitar playing by Dick Dale. Yes, that Dick Dale. But again, Keith sounds like a drunk karaoke singer in that while he's trying to sing it respectfully like the original recording, unfortunately it more so sounds like a middle-aged man trying so hard to desperately and depressingly relive his youth again. The third song of side 2 is Backdoor Sally.
Backdoor Sally, won't you let me in? I'm out there in the alley, can't you hear me knocking?
Like most of the songs on this album is another off-key rocker, yay, which Moon is clearly straining and struggling with. Like towards the end of this song, his voice is clearly cracking and sounding really hoarse due to him overstraining, and pretty much the song then goes again to him yelling the lyrics really loud. Like I imagine the mic probably most likely stopped working because of this. The fourth song on side 2 is a cover, which is, you guessed it, a cover of the Beatles' 1965 hit, In My Life from the Rubber Soul album.
There are places I remember.
So it's not surprising that Keith decided to cover this song purely because of the fact that he had not only had worked with Ringo Starr, but also because John Lennon had given him Move Over Mrs. L. While the Beatles version has some fantastic work from the other three Fab Four members, who not only sing the backing harmony vocals for John wonderfully, but also contribute the instruments that contributed to the song so brilliantly but so effectively. Unfortunately, the version on Two Sides of the Moon is, however, just downright sad, as it sounds like a sad message from a man who's lived a life of feeling helpless and hopelessness. Which isn't surprising, as during these sessions, Keith Moon himself would have these moments of low self-esteem and depression, in that he'd not only get annoyed by the producers constantly demanding takes of his vocals for the songs, which would one night lead to a low ceiling covered in spotlights having every single bulb smashed out with an ashtray every time recording was stopped. But while his version of In My Life isn't a good cover by all means, it isn't awful as well, as it's a decent version of the Beatles' classic overall. The last song, called Together, just features Ringo and him basically having a banter type of conversation over a beat being played behind them towards the middle ending bit of the song. So there isn't anything else to say from there. The beat is fine and Keith's voice sounds surprisingly okay here from the very little singing he does. While I don't think Two Sides of the Moon is the worst album ever made, overall, I do think that unless you're a Who fan like myself, I'd honestly say that this album should be avoided at all cost, as you'll be disappointed by the lack of singing from Keith himself, and the soulless production that just sounds lifeless, which is just a hard listening experience in general overall as a whole. After the recording sessions had ended, MCA's then president at the time told Skip Taylor at their first meeting that a lot of money had been invested before he had even assumed production duties, and that the company was preparing to spend an enormous sum of money in promotion and marketing, which, unfortunately, due to Moon's lifestyle and that image of wanting to be a solo singer, could make marketing such an album hard to do. Plus, over $200,000, I shit you not, was just spent for the recording cost alone, and that Moon had claimed he received a non-returnable advance for the same amount due to these sessions being so troublesome, in part due to his drug and alcohol addiction, along with the mood swings he was experiencing at the time of these sessions. So with the album finally being prepared for a 1975 release, MCA also had initially refused to pay for the elaborate sleeve, to which when Moon and Taylor, along with another producer, went to meet with the MCA president at the time, Moon had asked to stop in front of an Army and Navy store on the way to this meeting, and then returned with a fire axe which he had kept hidden on himself. At the meeting, the then MCA president once again denied this sleeve request, criticizing them for the excessive cost of the album, and most likely Moon's odd behavior during these sessions, to which Keith would then respond by placing himself directly in front of the then president's desk and holding the fire axe above the desk and said, "What's it gonna be, dear boy? My album cover or a new desk?" Finally released in March 1975, Two Sides of the Moon was negatively criticized and attacked. Nevertheless, this apparently didn't stop Keith Moon from working on a second album in which he had recorded a few songs for the project, which would later be included on both the 1997 CD of the album and the 2006 deluxe edition. You know what's funny? I actually have a soft spot for Do Me Good, in that while it's not his finest hour musically, it actually doesn't sound bad in the sense of the backing vocals and the instrumentation from the musicians present with him at the time. Well, unfortunately, you know where this story sadly ends, so instead of me over-explaining it all, please just search up Keith Moon's Final 24 Hours, and you'll learn more about it from that documentary than what I can tell you. While Keith Moon's singing wasn't his best quality about him, you can't say the same about his drumming, as his unique style of playing would forever change the landscape of 60s British rock and roll. And plus, The Who's countless musical changes as a group throughout the 14 years of having him as their crazy out there drummer, whether it be from their early proto-punk mud rock sounding beat of their early hits, to the psychedelic and even rock opera / disco sounds of their later songs. For that, Keith Moon is remembered always, and for that, we wannabe drummers out there thank him for making the drums look so fun and exciting to play, while also showing people that a rock and roll lifestyle isn't a quick, sure way of living a long-lasting life. Again, thanks for watching this. Please let me know what you think of it and what you would like me to talk about in the next video. Anyways, adios.